Okay, all right, so we are happy to have 12th grade Blue Group to present to us their findings and their research on American police brutality. So, 12th grade Blue Group.
Good afternoon. We came today to present our topic, the American police brutality. Okay. The abuse treatment of the police continue to that nowadays and every day in the country of America. The victims are always the people of the color, the women and the poor people. They use the brutality under the name of the war on terror, zero tolerance, and equality of life. This is the basic explanation for why they use the brutality. And the use of excessive force by the police against African Americans, Asian Americans, Arabs, and Indians has been cited as one of the most pressing human rights problems facing the United States.
Okay, first we're going to discuss about the excessive force used by the law enforcement officials and the police officers. They tortured the people severely and deadly by first electrically shocking men's genitals, raping them with cattle prods, as well as depriving them of bathroom facilities, sleep, and nourishment. The torture was not only physically, but it was also orally, as they were calling them niggers, coupled with racial slurs throughout the interrogations. There was a police commander who called John Berg. He tortured over 100 African Americans, and he was fired later from the police department, but then he lived normally with no charge accused against him, and he took his police pension as usual, as if he didn't do anything. The superior officers were aware of what was happening, but they were silent about it, and a reporter said that either they were participating in this or they failed to end it. The damage was not only psychology, but it was also emotionally and physically. The victims didn't get to get their medicine, and those who got to get their medicine, their statute of limitation had expired during their imprisonment. Also, San Francisco have witnessed the police brutality as an incident happened when two men called Harold Taylor and Robin Scott. They were tortured severely, and they were forced to convince wrongful statements. They didn't do it, and they were forced to sign pre-written statements. The statements later were inadmissible because they obtained through torture, and then the court took the charge against them as inadmissible. Additionally, there is an aspect also in the excessive force which is called the taser. Taser is a stun gun with 50,000 volt shot. It paralyzed the person temporarily, and over 150 people were died because of that gun. And most of the use of that gun were against African Americans or people of color generally. In Washington and Seattle, only 10% of the population were black, and half of the people there were shot by that gun, and all of them were African Americans. Also, the children did not survive that gun. It was used in the schools, in high schools, and the officers were justifying their actions as they are breaking up fights, subduing students, or even intimidating students. However, they were not doing that. They were up fights physically, like in violent ways. The excessive force used against people was generally against the people of color, or those who were the most abiding people. They were non-violent and conservative people, but the discrimination and racism were always in their blood. Okay, the physical beatings were also happening, and the people were knocking down into the ground. They were throwing and slammed against the walls, and they were even twisting. Their hands were twisted. The physical beatings were so harsh, especially in the prisons. But however, when they were arresting people. Okay. Then we got to another point, which is about rape and sexual assault. The officers and the law enforcement officials were targeting the immigrant women, transgender women, homeless, sex workers, and women living as mentally ill. They were harassing them. They were asking them to stop searching, to bend over and show their private areas. The percentage of the reporting rate is far less than the real women have been subjected to. But a reporter said that this happened because the women were afraid to accuse the officials. They were afraid that they might do other worse things to them. Up to 17% of sex workers interviewed reported that the sexual harassment, abuse, and rape by law enforcement officers, and approximately 20% of other acts of sexual abuse were committed by the police officers.
Next. America began the recording of the excessive force 50 years before the Second World War. From the beginning of the Second World War, the African American people started to leave America to the other countries and states all around the world, just basically to find jobs and to support their families. From the American police perspective, all they are doing is only such a serious business to do. America, where the homicide rate is a relatively higher compared to the other developed countries, and have many guns per person, which is the most violent country known yet. Said Dr. Elma Ruddle, she's a dentist who lives in New Jersey, who have been stopped with more than 100 times on the turnpike in the New Jersey troopers. She said that it's like a tax. It's something you put up with, and then you go on with your life. She said that according to the interaction with the policeman. The policeman, when you start interacting with them, then you can get rid of them later on. Also, there was a group of students who were going to protest against the policeman and the government because of the hiring practices of the local government. Then the policeman actually interrupted their way and opened fire against them. 43 people from those Mexican people were died. And such a case shows the complicity of the United States in the work of the Mexican state violence, and that the United States failed to military training and tactics their policemen to control the real crimes of the Mexicans. Another example was Eric Garner. He's a 43 years old man who was selling untaxed cigarettes. The police then stopped him and asked him if this cigarettes was for him or he's selling it. And like any normal man, he said that those cigarettes are for him and he's not selling them. So the policeman didn't just accuse that, and then he got it on the floor with the help of 3 other policemen. Eric Garner shouted, "Don't touch me, please, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, get out of me, get out of me." Then he said this word 11 times, this sentence 11 times, and the policeman kept the force on him. Garner died because of heart attack. He was a diabetic and had an asthma problem. He left behind him a wife and 6 children without the support and without their needs. Said the writer of this article that every time a man dies because of the excessive force of a policeman, they only hear that the country gonna help the policeman to adapt with the people and make it better to communicate with them. But actually that all stops at promises and words. Nothing was ever sold. All people in the audience was just convinced that this crime didn't deserve such an effort and force to do. And even though this crime was made up with a shock hold, and it's a device of force they used, and it became an illegal device to use since 1993, and this was used. And this is, and no one just asked the officer what this is doing. According to the Black African people, Barack Obama said, "Nothing of significance, nothing of benefit results from the destructive acts. Resist is real." This is the real word that convinces the people in America that the racism is there. Yeah, there is a racism. The black people, African people, were about 4 times as likely to die in a custody or while being arrested than white people. And they are also 2 times than any other race to be accused. At once, a white policeman killed a black teenager called Michael Brown. The committee against scrutiny didn't examine the death of the guy, respecting the judging decision on this. Okay. The common incidents of the police use of force, both fatal and non-fatal, in the USA. There has been a progress in America, and the fact that the FBI didn't know anything about those. So when a policeman makes an accident or kills someone, his colleague doesn't ask or report him. And that was the people in America asked for such a thing called the silent code, that all the policemen should report their friends when there is a crime. In 1994, the U.S. government got up a law, made the Pentagon to give away the surplus weapons from the war-era military to the local military, to the local weapons used by the policemen inside America. Weapons that were used in the enemy of faith were held into the American citizens. And in the last years, 27 American people were killed by the terrorism. A person would frequently die 29 times from an American policeman than from a terrorist.
So the American brutality did not stop only in discrimination, racism, and excessive force. It reached to the most threatening prison the Guantanamo Bay. We all have heard about the Guantanamo Bay, but we didn't know what happens inside. They use dehumanizing treatment, sensory deprivation, torturing, and disappearance of people with no trace. It was a failure America has created for those who oppose or refuse submission. And they arrest detainees without any evidence to prove that and without no obvious logical reasons. Obama, once he took the authority, promised to diminish the prison, but as usual and as expected from him, he convinced the court to not listen to the detainees' appeals, and so they kept the prison, continuing the Bush program of imprisonment, and that's why we are not safe now as much as we were 11 years ago. In fact, many Americans, about 60% of them, accept the reality for the Guantanamo Bay to exist. However, they don't know the injustice and inhumane treatment that happens inside it. There are now 100 detainees who are in their hunger strikes. 40 of them are being force-fed, especially Muslims in the holy months of Ramadan. They force long pipes inside their mouth so that the glucose can reach their stomach, and they use densers, injections, so that they forcibly feed them. Also, because of the dehumanizing treatment of the American police in Chicago, some citizens called that Guantanamo Bay has reached Chicago. Why? Because the police officers there used to, especially children, they used to abuse them, deprive them of their human rights, and torture them. As innocent of this is a police or a lawyer who has a client, and they found out that the client's name was changed in the database book, and so they took him to the home square, which is in Guantanamo Bay. After 8 hours of integration and interviewing, they found out that he was released with a head injury. As it's obvious, he went there healthy and complete and everything is fine, but then he went out with a head injury. So they discovered that they force people to confess wrongful statements, as my colleague said, and they force them to do or to confess what they want them to say. So, to sum it up, the most important of all is that those law enforcement officials are responsible for what is going on in America, especially in prisons, and they are rarely charged. And what is making the issue worse is that the officials, especially those who cover up the crimes, are not found guilty. So there are no action taken against those officers to be examples for the rest of them. So many complaints of the police mistreatment remain private and confidential, so that the public could not have access to it. And it is a clear evidence that governmental agencies are hiding it from people because we all know that it's unfair and injustice. So the numbers of victims have increased since we have started our research paper. We started months ago, and now the numbers are greatly increasing, which is a huge number actually. Few weeks ago, Freddie Gray, 25 years old, has been killed, brutally killed and tortured. And now the 6 officers who were responsible for his death were found guilty and were charged, but those who covered up the issue were not found guilty, and they walked away free, as if they did nothing, and that's what they're making the government more weaker. The system is not in favor of the victims, but it protects those who wrongfully commit crimes. Thank you.
Any questions?
Okay, thank you.